I just might have to go live a little bit early because it looks like we got Don Cato in here already rocking with the kid, man. Salute to you and thanks for being first. Black First is where I lay my hat, man. This is the B1 Network presenting Debate, debunking everything bitch ass traders espouse. So I'm going to get into a good presentation here. I got a great set of information that I'm going to be providing. Look, I'm going to give you what I'm going to provide up front. It's also linked into the description so you can do your own further research. But there's 5 major things that we're going to want to cover right here. So it's the historical origins of racial predatory lending by Nair. That's one hell of a source from the University of UPenn Law Journal. So, and then we also have the National Archives. That's the evidence establishing lineage and a reasonable claim. Let that sink in right there. What up, Brother George? I also found the primary source for reparations for Holocaust victims. That person who is also against reparations for ADOS. We have that primary source in their own words, who they are, why they're a credible source, and all of that, and then in their own words. Next up, we have some recent developments on reparations for ADOS discussion, not the actual reparations, but that discussion as we know at HR 40 as they look to have more discussions and do that study and develop proposals for reparations. So what happens there when I highlight the word discussion, understand that this is just another civil rights discussion taking place. It was from the United States Department of Treasury as the source. And then finally, that salute to my executive mentor, John Hope Bryant, for being asked and participating as the host there at the Freedmen's Bank for that Freedmen's Bank forum. So that's what I'm going to be presenting. All facts. When I have my debate, I like to use primary sources. I put those sources in the description before I even go into them. And then I told you what those sources would be. And I'm going to also take it to the next level and make sure that I'm giving you the caliber of the professional presentation that you can come to know me by, professionalism. And so I'm going to start off here by sharing my screen. Yep, let me share that screen right there. Bam, just like that. And then, as you know, in B1 Brother Mo fashion, it is Friday. You got anywhere else that you can be, but you're right here rocking with me. So I got to throw some music into this joint. Everybody should be familiar with this right here. This is what we need to get our mojo and our swagger up. Now, I did download it from the recreator of this, ASAP Ferg smash hit, New Level. So I'm going to let that instrumental go on and set its pace as we go on and jump into this information. Salute everybody that's rocking with us right up front. If you like the video, if you like B1 Brother Moses and you want me to continue delivering content, be sure to like the video. And by the end of this video, hopefully you can also like the video or share that video with someone that you know who likes this kind of information. So it might not be in totality for you, but it might be something that you know somebody loves this politics. You know they love Black First. You know they love talking reparations. Let's share this with them because I got 5 booming sources right now that I'm going to be presenting. 5 booming sources, credible. And what we do here as a part of the B1 Network, we give that agitation and pushback. This is B1 Network presents Brother Moses. I'm going to give it its own moniker, Debate. And I'm going to do it just like the GOATs over there on Nyla Says and Tad's Exclusives, the host of media channels that are available here in Black YouTube. I'm going to give it an acronym. When I say debate, I say I am debunking everything bitch-ass traders espouse. Debunking everything bitch-ass traders espouse. And that's not just for these niggas who say, well, reparations, niggas will do reparations, niggas will spend it all. All of those stupid ass talking points that they use. No, I'm going to give you credible sources and facts. HR 40, we know, is the study to develop proposals. And so it is up to us to find those proposals and to legitimize them with credible facts. And so as you see here on the screen, I'm going to start off with a context for reparations debate, restorative justice claims of American descendants of slaves. This is Brother Moses. I am a media developer, and today is March the 6th, 2020. And let me go to the next slide. Oh, my goodness. We can't even see the slides yet. Am I tripping? Oh, let me do this. Bam, there you go. That's what you should have been looking at. B1 Networks presents Debunking Everything Bitch Ass Traders Espouse, a context for reparations debate. right? So they don't want to debate with me no more about reparations or restorative justice claims where they know I'm a little bit stronger at. They don't want to talk economics and livelihood. They don't want to look into the future and project into what a savvy business black man can do with the reparations claim. No, they don't even want to talk the historical context. So I'm going to give them the context anyway. They ain't going to run from this. Restorative justice claims for American descendants of slaves. Keep in mind that this will just be one deeply situated in the era that I talk about, which is that 1860s, that Homestead Act, all the way through Jim Crow. Bam. Look at that thing slid on up right there because a little bit more context. Let me do it this way. I'm going to hit them just like this. Yes, sir. So I put the links in the description. Let me give myself a little bit of breathing room here with the music. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, but I'm going to keep the energy level up. So hopefully you can still hear that music in the background. We got to get fired up about this. So on The Shadow of Credit, the historical origins of racial predatory lending and its impact upon African-American wealth accumulation. Now, this is the UPenn Law Journal, author Charles Lewis Neer III. In that introduction, primary source, right? Law school. Let's talk about it. Responding to a controversy regarding incendiary remarks that surfaced in the media from his former pastor, Reverend Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., the United States Senator and Democratic presidential candidate Barack Obama came to the city of Philadelphia to deliver a major address on the issue of race in the United States. In a remarkable and widely praised speech delivered on March the 18th, 2008, Senator Obama grounded his examination of the complexities of race on an analysis of the historical legacy of discrimination faced by African Americans. After invoking the words of William Faulkner, shout out that Faulkner Initiative, for the proposition that the past isn't dead and buried, in fact, it isn't even past, he proceeded to explain that many of the disparities that exist in the African American community today can be directly traced to inequalities passed on from earlier generations that suffered under the brutal legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. This was Senator Barack Obama. Now, he starts off his introduction just like that. He goes on to say he proceeded to elaborate on some of the specific historical reasons behind racial inequalities, explaining. And then he goes into that nigger splaining that a politician would do. Legalized discrimination where blacks were prevented, often through violence, from owning property, or loans were not granted to African-American business owners, or black homeowners could not access FHA mortgages. See, that's later, but we're going to stop right here and provide some context where our senator at the time from Chicago and then our president may have missed it. He could have drove it home a little bit more solid. You can listen to the speech. It's in the description below. Those loans that were not granted to African-American business owners, that will be the context to which we have this historical lecture. See, he said from earlier generations that suffered on the brutal legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. That's what we tell you, hoping that it stimulates people to research further into that legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, to look into the 1860s and see those land grant college system, the education of the black freed man and his children, his wife, and that curriculum developing over time through those HBCUs, creating those institutions of higher learning. All right. Now, I did not know that this thing was just going to keep spinning for me, so I got to slow it down right there. This is a credible source here. The Shadow of Credit, the historical origins of racial predatory lending and its impact upon African-American wealth accumulation, from the University of Pennsylvania, UPenn Law. It's in that journal that I pulled the source. If you don't like the source, then go after the source. But let me tell you this about that source. Look, it's just going to keep scrolling. I didn't built it to be a short presentation, but too short for my long-winded self. The work that provided the basis for this article was supported by funding under a doctoral dissertation research grant from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Why is that important? Because who is this token Negro who runs the housing and urban development today? Why ain't this dude running for president? What is his actual legacy? We got a damn puppet in office today that is not driving home these key initiatives. This is the research. The universities are pulling out that research for our reparations claims. And yet the man who is sitting in that position is not fighting on our behalf. Who the hell is not going to fight for the best interest of America but a damn traitor? Look, it wants me to keep going, but no, we ain't going yet. The author is solely responsible for the accuracy of the statements and the interpretations contained in the article. Such interpretations do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So there you go. This is coming from top sources, and they're still trying to dismiss their role in influencing great governance here in America, right? So you have the guy who's sitting there who looks like us, but is not acting for the best interests of us. Big U dot big S dot US. It is in the best interest. And I'm going to show you how right here as we get into some more sources. The National Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, Washington, D.C., chartered by Congress March 3rd, 1865. Under those officers, total deposits of over $2 million. Wilmington branch, Dock Street. This is that primary source evidence that they need. So show me the evidence. I'm giving you this context, so rock with me. A context for reparations debate, restorative justice claims of American descendants of slaves. This is just one. Today is March 6, 2020. If you like the video, share it with someone that you know likes this kind of information, because we have work to do. History lesson on the Freedmen's Bank. It was chartered by the United States Congress, Big U dot Big S dot Congress, in March on 1865. It was the Freedmen. It was said by the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is why I put the quotation marks around it. And this is the history that they're laying out. They said freedmen squandered the pay they received as Union soldiers. So Brother Moses will tell you, I come from a legacy, a tradition of soldiers. We can trace our soldiers back. And so this reparations claim, pursuant to even my own family, but the broader collective of African-American service members, is where we root this conversation. It was the civil rights, and thus that is the error that I'm going to keep giving you this information on, just in case you got to debunk every bitch ass traitor. What did I say? Debunking everything a bitch ass traitor espouses, in case you get into one of those debates yourself and they're talking about reparations in that negative light. Watch how I work today with this presentation. All right. So Anson M. Sperry was a United States Army paymaster. They can look him up if they want. He co-fostered the creation of this chartered system of banking for African Americans at the same time while we were trying to develop an education system using those land grants, trying to fight for that 40 acres and a mule using politics, the basis to which we wanted to achieve a goal of economics. Hopefully you can keep rocking with me. So chapters were forbidden to make loans. Did you see that right there? When President Obama was talking about it, and he said legalized discrimination where blacks were prevented, often through violence, from owning property or loans. So in 1865, when they chartered this Freedmen's Bank, this Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, which was started with a different name. What was the original name? It had something to, let me see if I can find it here in my notes. The Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Land. That is what it was originally called. And that collective of institutions that would manage the transactions of those soldiers, those black soldiers who were fighting, and that allocation of land and wealth that they were supposed to receive for their service and with their emancipation. But what happened? Chapters were forbidden to make loans, impacting the investment and the ability of those banks to invest in those same people whose economic needs they were established to steward and manage. Why does that happen? Well, I'll tell you. Next bullet point: a board of 50 white, I would put in northern, trustees managed the affairs of that Freedmen Bank. They called them carpetbaggers. They expanded it to 30 branches in a dozen states. So they started taking over all of those little black institutions, those banks, those places where black soldiers and their family and their loved ones could go when they needed to transact in American currency. And then they expanded it to about 72,000 depositors. Remember, 40,000 was for those land grants when they were talking about 40 acres and that mule at this time. And they were talking about who is going to be eligible for this land. And it was those soldiers who they were looking at first and their family and loved one. Later, this bank was led by Frederick Douglass with $10,000 of his own capital. Final bullet on the Freedmen Bank history. It failed and was razed to the ground in 1874. Its primary spot was burned to the ground. So again, President Obama legalized discrimination where blacks were prevented, often through violence, from owning property or loans. I'm going to give you the other big talking point because I got to keep it moving. 57 million in deposits after several successful years. So from 1865 to about 1868. Remember, they don't even have funding really yet in the Second Morrill Act of 1890 to actually secure funding for these HBCUs, where people like Booker T. Washington would start later on, Tuskegee University, where Mary Bethune-Cook could get her money for her college, HBCU down south, down there in Florida, where the Atlanta colleges like the Morehouse College and the Spelman could pop up, where Hampton and the Howard University, where those educated, look, listen, so you found your talented 10th, Du Bois, and their families do have the means to get their children educated. And now you're creating a curriculum where black exceptional talent can go and get that higher education, and it's underfunded. But those families, those black families, even at the time, who could finally afford to send students, 100 students would go to those universities per year until they grew. Only 4 African Americans had a higher degree from any college in 1864. Only 4. Maybe it was 40. I think it was around 40. I like to use the number 4, but there's a 4 in that number. I think it was 40. By the time of 1900, there was like 2,000 graduates because they were able to use those land grant college systems to finally get it. And they finally got funding for those schools in 1890. And it was still abysmal, like $1,000 per year afterwards. But it started right here with the banking system. And I've shown you the laws, the whole legislative agenda of Abraham Lincoln, the Homestead Act, the Land Grant Act, the Federal Banking Act, the 1862 Confiscation of Land Act. So all of that confiscation of land, then the issuing of those lands, and the 40 acres and a mule argument is deeply rooted in what President Obama was elaborating on, from owning property. And he kind of just glosses over that part about often through violence is how blacks were prevented. And then that specific part about loans not granted to African-American business owners as we were getting our Black Wall Streets up and running with exceptional black entrepreneurs and teachers and thought leaders. So 57 million in deposits, predominantly from African Americans. That is a hell of a feat, but that is a number that we have to use when we're quantifying reparations. A repository establishing lineage and a reasonable HR 40 claim. That bullet right there. That bullet. That those banks are, and their information, those that weren't burnt to the ground, razed to the ground, those banks are a repository establishing lineage. Remember, this is for when you're debating people and they say, well, how do you know who's going to actually get it? And so to debunk their dumb ass talking points and everything that they espouse, and the reason why they're even deflecting to that lineage argument, you have to tell them that the data exists and there is a repository that establishes lineage and a reasonable HR 40 claim. Next bullet, it sets the precedent of government complicity in that disenfranchisement. How, Brother Moses? Because it told you right there that those chapters that were serving those African-American freedmen, that freedmen bank that they were establishing, those chapters were forbidden to make loans. And we know the impact of loans today, 6.8%, 9%. The federal treasury decreased the amount that banks have to pay back on those loans by, what was it, 5 basis points or 50 basis points? You know, it comes down 25%. So it's cheaper for those banks to issue out that money in the form of loans. So depositors, whatever it is, your check, your job, your business, you put money into the bank. And if you keep it in their savings or checkings, they might give you 1.8% return on it. But if they lend it out in the form of a mortgage, they're going to be receiving whatever it is that interest rate is on that loan for 15 years. Big money. And that's how banks have investment capital, because they can take it and make bigger investments as they turn investments into bigger investments. But no, those banks were geared towards stocks and treasury notes and things like that, low yield items, not actual loans, and being an originator of loans for the homes that would have been needed to help 40 acres and a mule survive. Why were those banks forbidden? Because that was a government decision. It wasn't just because people in the South did not like Negroes. It was that American economics was stalled by politics, and the government was complicit in that disenfranchisement by forbidding those early black banks from issuing loans. A primary example of the economic impact of slavery and Jim Crow. So when you want to give them a primary example and you're using this information, now you are equipped with the real context. This is exactly what happened. And hopefully, as you have those conversations, you're able to articulate it faster than I was able to articulate it here, because this was just one page of many. Because what we have to do is establish lineage and a reasonable claim. If you're doing it as an individual, cool. But as a collective, we know there are many examples of reasonable claims, like lynching, for example, and those families that had an ancestor who was lynched, and those sheriffs and whoever have allowed those mobs and those squads to go in and kill members of those communities. The bank that was actually burned down, prosecution for all of that death and destruction. Those are claims, and those economic impacts are what we talk about, just like a Trayvon Martin or a Stephon Clark, a wrongful death claim. But those are reasonable claims, and establishing reasonable claims. How do we do so? Well, we got to give them primary data. The National Archives of ADOS bank depositors. It told you it was about 72,000 depositors. And so being able to find those names will be critical as we continue to have this discussion. So you see on the right, that picture is the 29th Regiment of Connecticut. So we're talking Pennsylvania, their law school in that area, finding information. So it was the Connecticut Volunteer Infantry. Remember, these soldiers was from the Union Army. So keep this shit in context. Give them all the information they need to shut the fuck up. This one was established in South Carolina, or this bank, the Military Savings Bank at Beaufort, South Carolina, opened in 1864 and would eventually become one of Freedmen's Savings Bank's branches. So those are the soldiers in the image, and that's the context to which we're talking about it. Why is this information important? Because these are the surviving records, the primary sources of 29 branches of the Freedmen's Bank that are reproduced on National Archives microfilm. Publication M816, registers of the signatures of depositors in branches of the Freedmen Savings and Trust Company, 1865 to 1864. Chronology, timeline, what happened, why did it happen, the real facts, not just people saying, oh, the Freedmen's banked because it failed because it was inept. No, give them the real information to debunk everything. Let me keep going. There are 46 volumes of indexes to deposit ledgers. Let me give you some facts. Let me give you facts. Because these indexes, remember, it's called like an index card. It's the name, the address, the date of birth, social security number, if they had one, whatever the information that bank needed to show and prove that you are the trustee of those deeds. You are the one who's entitled to receive a dividend after making your transaction with that institution. The Federal Reserve note is just an article or a piece of paper, a note, a slip An index, a card, something to show a transaction has occurred. It is a document. It is tangible monies. It is the idea that a transaction occurred, and because that transaction occurred, there needed to be something exchanged. Those indexes represent the 72,000 people who said, I will exchange my ID and I will exchange my right to claim over this money in order to receive a later dividend. And it jumped up to $57 million worth. And there are 46 volumes of those index cards categorized in different ways and such, but 46 volumes. Why is that important? Again, Brother Moses will tell you that the history of the FICO score is the index cards that white people used when they went to their institutions, their markets, their pawn shops, their home goods in the early days, wherever they went to get their groceries and they didn't have money and they needed a credit system. It was on that index card that the FICO system was created. Look it up. Often those white businesses would take those index cards from those white folks and they would say this is good, and they would discriminate against the black folks and not allow them to have credit at those stores. They did not have to serve blacks all the way into the 1960s. They just didn't have to. Some did, but they didn't have to. So those index cards were the establishment of the FICO credit score. Today they say niggas made bad decisions and that's why their credit is all fucked up, but they will not give you the history of that index card and how it became the premise of FICO score or credit worthiness. White people getting approved with an index card, black people in their communities not getting approved on the index cards. But I'm gonna take you all the way back. That was a fun fact just for you. Look it up. So where is your proof is what they like to say when you're giving a debate, not just the primary sources, but the unmicrofilmed records. Despite the dismal financial state of the Freedmen's Bank when it closed, the three commissioners appointed to liquidate the assets of the bank and repay its depositors announced the first dividend payments on November 1st, 1875. Between 1875 and 1883, the commissioners and the comptroller of the currency declared 5 dividend payments amounting to 62% of what was actually owed to depositors. 62 cents on a dollar. Can you get that? When I say where is the proof, this is what you're talking about when you're establishing a reparations claim, that even though they banked with this bank, that it was chartered by the United States government, that it was underfunded, but it was funded by the depositors, and then discriminatory regulation is what crippled it in its ability to have proper investment from even its depositors. All of that context then comes down to, well, how much do you owe them? To receive dividend payments, depositors had to mail in their passbooks, so that identification card, that index, that receipt, that proof of purchase, with their return address to Washington. Of the 61,000 depositors eligible to receive the dividends, only about 30,000 sent in their passbooks. Most of these depositors were holders of large accounts. Many small depositors, some 31,000, never requested their dividends. Other depositors had died or moved and could not be located by commissioners. Where are the descendants of those banks? What are they owed, and what would be the value of that debt? So you can't in one hand tell me you have the archives of all of them, which means you know exactly who those people are and were. And then at the other end say, well, I couldn't find them and it was up to them to send it in. So President Obama, in his More Perfect Union speech, may have missed a couple of things, but he said something that was spot on. He said, many of the disparities that exist in the African-American community today can be directly traced to inequalities passed on. Then he went into some niggasplaining, and we may have missed that came up because there was a controversy that popped up about his Reverend Wright, and he used this opportunity to more or less Negro Spain. I'll give it to you in his words. And I put the timestamp at the bottom, so just in case you want to fact check me, you don't even got to do too much work. The link is in the description. The timestamp is 12 minutes and 23 seconds. That's how precise this presentation is. And he said, and this helps explain perhaps my relationship with Reverend Wright. As imperfect as he may be, he has been like family to me. Now, if you rock with B1 Brother Moses, I gave you another concept yesterday, a bit of controversy, some agitation, as we call it in the B1 network, a little bit of pushback on Joe Biden and Michelle Obama, VP, on that ticket, why they might as well run together. They're as close as kissing cousins, where he said something similar, where he was like, they are like family to me, and he was referring to the Biden family and the wife, Dr. Jill Biden. So he loves to throw this, and they are like family to me, right on out there when he's niggas planning. So let's move off of him, because we know that they have influencers. And I told you I got some strong primary sources. This one is the primary source for reparations for Holocaust victims. And keep in mind that this also means that this is the guy who was advising the presidents since before Jimmy Carter. And by default, against reparations for ADOS. So what happened? Who the hell was advising President Obama on his position on reparations, and why wasn't that the agenda when you had a black president? That's another one of those bitch ass talking points that people like to deflect to. So, and others like to say, well, he did give reparations to the farmers in Virginia, which is just one example of a reparations claim, but we know that there are many, and thus the discussion continues. Stuart E. Eisenstadt, senior counsel, said, as a result, by every socioeconomic measure, health, education, income, wealth, home ownership, and employment levels, we remain, I said we because I'm African American and I'm the one that's presenting this lecture series. We remain far behind white Americans. See, that's what that traitorous Negro will say. There's, well, we're so far behind, and it's because of black man's accountability. It's almost like they want to jump into the Booker T. Washington, pull yourself up by the bootstrap arguments, but they are ill-equipped to talk Booker T. Washington because, as you know, I'm still talking about Booker T. Washington and those traitors, those people who had bitch-ass talking points, everything that they espouse. Let's cut them to shit. He said, we must do more to acknowledge, confront, and end institutional racial discrimination. Now, there is so much in this primary source because this is the same guy who fought for restitution for Holocaust victims. And there was just a recent publication by our brother T. West where they are getting another round of funding. They are getting another round of funding. Holocaust victims, descendants of Holocaust victims, they're getting their another round of funding while looking at us and telling us how hard and how difficult and how divisive it would be if there was reparations for slavery. In his own words, October 27th, 2019, the advisor to the presidents, the primary source, him damn self. They get caught up on the Obama and don't look at the advisor to all of these banks and institutions and political influencers and who they look to for information and the information that he's saying. Now, he's the guy who's pushing reparations for the other community and pushing against reparations for us. And we're not breaking this shit down because we would rather talk passport gate instead of those passbooks. Miss me with that bullshit. I am not going to the Prophet of Thought series to debate a clown bitch ass race traitor like MOT who misses me with this type of intellectual discourse. I don't have the patience to go back and forth with buffoons. This is the primary source, Holocaust restitution, and they got another round. If you watch T. West, they got another round of funding while they're still looking and laughing at us and telling everybody that they can tell why reparations for African Americans would be divisive. how difficult it would be. And if you've watched this presentation from the beginning, I've given you a funding mechanism already through the Freedmen's Bank. It's still there. I tell you, they want to give you every excuse to distract you under the sun. But I ain't about that life. Let me show you this image real quick, just to keep the conversation flowing. So when you put it in and you look at it, images like this are some of those primary sources. To freedmen, save your money, safekeeping and accumulation of interest. That was the thing that happened after like 68 or 72 or something like that, when they finally changed the policies. And once they did that, boy, did they get backlash. Boy, did they get backlash, and they burned that headquarters to the ground. Other ways that they fought against it was through the media. This is what they want us to keep looking like. This is that image, that postcard to keep the Negro without his agency. So the Freedmen's Bureau, an agency to keep the Negro in idleness at the expense of the white man, twice vetoed by the president, when we know after they assassinated the president who signed this legislation and then was killed a couple of months later. They killed him for it. And he made it a law by Congress. Support Congress and you support the Negro. Sustain the president and you protect the white man. So this is what the pushback was through their media. And this is why people like Booker T. Washington could then come to the forefront and have other conversations about other shit. Stick with me. We are still rocking. And so we have a duty and a responsibility as African Americans to give a better contrast to the information that's, you know, the Encyclopedia Britannica will give it to you one way. Brother Moses and the B1 Network and you know, even members of the conscious community, you'll often hear it sometimes with the educated folks inside of the manosphere and other spaces where I take myself to get information. You'll hear it from a different perspective, a Black first perspective. What else do I got for you? So I've given you a couple of great sources so far. The historical origins of racial predatory lending by Nair. We use that information to establish the complicity of the federal government in the establishment of the Freedmen's Bank. They forbade them from issuing loans. They forbade them from issuing loans. That is the highest return that you're going to get. Housing. And housing was the primary focus because there was land grants being issued and you needed a bank to be able to transact as a landowner. And there was violence. I gave you the primary evidence from the National Archives. The primary evidence still exists today that you can look up. It is still right there, free and available for us. Microfilm, surviving records of 29 branches, the index cards as a premise for what the FICO and credit bureaus use even today is that index card. So it's still the disenfranchisement of the African American even today, because we know the FICO scores is one thing. When you look at the adverse impact of racial prejudice and discrimination in banking is the adoption of FICO scores to evaluate the credit worthiness. So index cards that were taken by white businesses at the time set the precedent for FICO scores. And because they discriminated against who they would issue credit to as a small business, and all the index cards are reflective of those white places, you have redlining. You have Black folks who don't have credit established or who were deemed high risk. And so now let's get into those words by our next source, which is the primary source for reparations for Holocaust victims, who is also against reparations for ADOS. Stuart Eizenstat held 4 Senate-confirmed positions in the Clinton administration, and he also served as a special representative of the president and Secretary of State on Holocaust-era issues from 1993 to 2001. During the Obama administration, he was special advisor on Holocaust issues to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry from 2009 to 2017. He was President Jimmy Carter's chief White House domestic policy advisor from 1977 to 1981, and he is the author of President Carter, The White House Years. Tell me I'm not giving you the top primary sources. How do you get anything closer to the reparations debate without looking at the actual primary source? How do you do it? And how do you have a debate with me if you cannot bring primary sources into the actual debate? In his words, I'm going to give you about 2 times through with this instrumental in his words, and then we'll move forward. But I just want to really establish that this is his words. Over the past few years, the idea of reparations for the effects of slavery in the United States has gone from a mostly academic discussion to a political possibility. This is his words. Discussed at presidential debates and in the halls of Congress. This summer, the House held a hearing on Bill H.R. 40, first introduced in 1989 by Representative John Conyers. We know this. And reintroduced after his retirement by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who called us little chocolate babies at that actual congressional hearing. What kind of little chocolate baby, Sheila? For real? That would form a commission to study proposals for how reparations would work in practice. So let's debunk the talking points. This is their job. This is what they're doing. And these are the things that they are saying. This is my ADOS reparations update. Several of the Democratic Party's candidates for president have said they support the House bill. One of them, Senator Cory Booker, who has since dropped out, introduced a companion bill in the Senate. Slavery is a profound historical wrong, one whose brutal legacy permeates American life today. People of color continue to suffer endemic discrimination in employment, housing, and new forms of voter suppression. As a result, by every socioeconomic measure, health, education, income, wealth, home ownership, and employment levels, they remain far behind white Americans. We must do more to acknowledge, confront, and end institutional racial discrimination. But, and you know when they say but, it's supposed to negate everything else that you just said. So I told you that he's also against us while at the same time for reparations for Holocaust victims. And this is why we're not getting progress, because those who have advised the president all the way even wrote the book back to Jimmy Carter since when John Conyers first published this, before even. And they have been working and getting reparations for the Holocaust victims ever since, while at the same time denying us this is the primary source in their own words. But reparations in the form of cash payments for descendants of slaves are not the way to right this grievous wrong. I write this having spent decades of my life negotiating more than $17 billion in reparations for Holocaust survivors. His words, bring it into the debate. What I learned as chief negotiator for both the United States government across several presidential administrations and for the Jewish Claims Conference. So we're trying to have ADOS conferences and people are undermining ADOS and Yvette Carnell and Tone Talks and you know, Tariq Nasheed and his hashtag tangibles. They're throwing shade at what is the same process, the same political strategy to bring about restorative justice. They're throwing shade at it and then wondering where our true problems are. Look, man, we got work to do. And we got to stop being distracted by those who are traitors to the very race and to the country that could stand to benefit the most from another infusion of cash from the United States federal government and the federal treasury. And these same people can generate $7 billion in less than a month for disaster preparedness to help prepare hospitals and help get the infrastructure together in case of a coronavirus pandemic outbreak. They can get billions of dollars in a day. But if you ask them about funding and this is what's owed, now they got every excuse in the world, but they don't want to bring the facts. And so he says what he's learned. And this is the person who has successfully negotiated for the Holocaust victims' reparations. And he said what he learned is that reparations are complicated, contentious, and messy, and they work best when the crime was recent and the direct victims are still alive. Based on his experience, he believes that trying to repay descendants of slaves could end up causing more problems than reparations would seek to solve, and that there are better ways to end racial disparities, end quote. Don't end quote. I said I'm gonna let it run a couple of times so you know that this is the actual advisor and the chief negotiator, and these are his words, and this is the real reason, not that bullshit that other people with bitch ass talking points would try to present. Now, if you know the real reason, then now you're able to debate against the actual real reason and against the actual real advisor to those presidents. You're not wasting your time talking to race traders. You were going right at the primary source. He says, to be clear, I am not saying that the horrors of slavery are greater or less than the horrors of the Holocaust, but the fact that slavery is so much farther in the past makes the logistics of reparations next to impossible. You see how he talks to them? He gives those white folks, those white bankers, those white decision makers, those white descendants of slave owners, those white private invested interests, those Southern whites, those daughters of the Confederacy, he gives them protection and cover. He gives them a talking point that says, look, it happened so long ago that it would be next to impossible, that it would do more harm than it would good. Bullshit. He ain't saying it'll do more harm than good for the descendants who, if you watch Brother Afro Synergy's channel, T West, he just told you they just got another round of funding for those same descendants. They weren't even there. They weren't even involved, but their children are still getting checks. So this is that double talk at its finest, and I'm just here to give you a little pushback when you're ready to give other people some pushback. Says it makes it makes the logistics next to impossible, when Brother Moses will tell you the Freedmen's Bank is still right there, that we have great tenures who are working for Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. We have great leaders who they can meet with, the United States Department of Treasury can meet with today. African-American leaders who can make sure the logistics are just as sound as any other investment opportunity that one might consider. But they're idiots, and they use bitch ass talking points. He says, even though some supporters of slavery reparations point to Holocaust reparations as a model, they are actually quite different. So he goes on to explain a little bit about when he was working with Bill Clinton as president. The link is in the chat. That is about as much of that as I'm going to share. It is the primary source. You see the double talk. You see how they work to prepare those who would argue against us and their constituents with the talking points they need. It is our job to find our representatives and folks who have the conversation with the Black first mentality to help us and equip us with the talking points we need to push back. B1 Network, Brother Moses, salute. My damn self. And everybody that's in the chat, be sure that y'all like the video, man, and share it with someone that you know who likes these kinds of discussions. All right. And so, as we bring this thing to a close, the actual update, the United States Department of Treasury press release, as you see there, the date is February 28th, 2020. Treasury announces Freedmen's Bank Forum. The forum will honor the bank's legacy, discuss economic opportunity for all Americans. You know how they play that game. This is published right there on our website. Link is in the description. I already gave you the history. No need to jump back there. But I did want to pay a big tribute, big shout out to my executive mentor, John Hope Bryant. I was there in Atlanta. He came to Morehouse, had a conversation. I was actually invited to the back room where that small select group can have the conversation in more depth with him. Understand that this discussion is on civil rights. He is not somebody out here pushing the civil rights agenda. He'll let people who want to do that type of grassroots politics have that type of conversation. But this executive mentor deals in the space of silver rights, SILVER, silver rights. He talks economics. He is founder of the Hope Foundation. He was a part of the Clinton Global Initiative and helped establish financial literacy, banking in a box type projects, grassroots projects, and a whole lot of chapters. He is still running with the legacy and the tradition of the Freedmen's Bank. He is a partner. He is an ally, but he is someone who relies on proximity to whiteness. He says, I don't care, black, white, or green, or black, white, yellow, or whatever. At the end of the day, we all need more green. and he was the host and moderator of that forum. There in Atlanta, March 2nd, 2020, John Hope Bryant, founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Operation Hope, will participate in the Freedmen's Bank Forum to be hosted by the United States Department of Treasury tomorrow, Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. The forum commemorates the 155th anniversary of the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company's charter. Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, commonly referred to as the Freedmen's Bank, was created to provide economic opportunity for newly emancipated Americans. Bryant will participate in a panel discussion entitled The Legacy of Freedmen's Bank in the Pursuit of Building Wealth with Kenneth Kelly, Chairman and CEO, First Independence Bank, and Chairman, National Bankers Association, and Thasundra Brown Duckett. Now, I had to give her a shout out. That African-American woman is phenomenal. Even if you look on my IG, it was a while back, but she is up there at JP Morgan Chase. So I don't just name drop just to be saying those things. Look her up. Thasundra Brown Duckett, CEO, Chase Consumer Banking. Still in this same lane of ownership, homes and things like that, big bucket items. Civil rights. The panel will provide context for the historical significance of the Freedmen's Bank and the promising future of private sector efforts to support wealth building for all Americans. They got to play that game, all Americans. I am pleased to join this important conversation on economic opportunity and the empowerment of our American communities, Bryant said. The mission of Operation Hope connects the legacy of the Freedmen's Bank established by President Abraham Lincoln and the second part of Dr. Martin Luther King's integration dream. It is our work on the ground through our National Hope Inside network every day to ensure civil rights for all. At the urging of Bryant, he's a key influencer. Clinton Global Health Initiative. He's a friend of Bill Clinton and all of that, and many black business owners at the upper levels. This is Bryant out of Atlanta, but he's a key influencer in politics as well. At the urging of then Treasury Secretary Jack Lew publicly renamed the Treasury Annex building the Freedmen's Bank building. So that was when that name changed, and they put that story out there just in case you missed it, in honor of the site where the Freedmen's Savings Bank once stood. And remember, Douglas was a leader and who invested $10,000 of their own capital in it. So we're going to keep this thing rocking. Talks about what the forum will look at: minority depository institution preservation. So the preservation of black banks, if all those words didn't mean anything to you on the first time through. Expanding banking opportunities through innovation and partnerships. These are the Tariq Nasheed's hashtag tangibles of what he's working on as your ADOS reparations update. This isn't the claim for politics. That's somebody else. That's the Tone Talks and the Yvette Carnell and whatever they deliver when it comes to what ends up on the ballot. Or maybe they're just having the conversation in a social media space, and the actual NAACP is supposed to be pushing politics. Maybe not. We have information. Check my Instagram. You'll actually see how much they have in their treasury to support reparations. Their lobbyists only got about $450,000. They damn self. The motherfuckers is broke as fuck. So maybe it's not the NAACP who can push forward a political agenda. And then we have to go to that next pillar, which would be the Congressional Black Congressional Black Caucus, excuse me. And if they're not all on board, then that is our work that we have to do. We got to do the young Pharaoh tactic and start getting our numbers up and start flooding their inboxes, hitting them with every tweet that we can get them until they've all signed on and all realize that we are serious about this conversation. And we would greatly appreciate having it on the ballot as something we can finally vote for, instead of always trying to find something on that ballot to vote against, which is 99% of that ballot in our case as a minority vote. They do that, and they can regalvanize this Democratic Party, this Clinton coalition, and this Joe Biden, Michelle Obama campaign. They do that, and they'll be speaking our language. They'll be conferring to what the damn chief negotiator for Holocaust victims would say. We have more work to do to fight this issue, see, because that's how we bring all of this information together. Secretary of the United States Treasury, the highest office that informs the economics of America, which is the capitalist system model for the world. That guy, Stephen Mnuchin, or however you say that dude's last name, was actually in attendance. And my executive mentor, John Hope Bryant, was able to get an interview with him. The link is in the description. And then again, like we showed you in history, where the comptroller was a part of the issuing of that dividend and finding all of those depositors when the bank failed. The comptroller's office, or the controlling of compensation, that office that helps control currency, when they were processing those claims and only paid 69 cents on a dollar and said, well, we couldn't even find 31,000 of them. Remember, this is one reparations claim that I've laid out for you to help you debunk all of their talking points. You have all the information. It won't take you this long to debunk those talking points that they use. Understand, they are being bitch ass traitors. And it is your duty at that moment to step up and to debate them on their talking points, on everything that they espouse. I've helped prepare you for that. Hopefully, you know somebody who has these conversations. You can learn more about John Hope Bryant. You can call him B1 or not. Let me give you one more issue. I don't care if you call him B1 or not. It will still be my executive mentor. And I understand that he's operating in a space of economics and civil rights. So I don't expect him to be out there marching for Stephon Clark's, or for those who have been lynched and prison reform and all of those other areas. This is economics, is his battle, and these are the things that he's doing. But I'll scroll down just so you can see. When you put his name into the YouTube, he has a lot of lectures. Financial literacy is his driving point. Liquid assets. He is an executive mentor to not just me as a student of Morehouse College and alum. He is an executive mentor to executives. He gets the meeting with the United States Treasury Department and has that conversation. He brings them in the room and talks billions of dollars for the Black community. He talks about how do we implement CRA, or the Community Reinvestment Act, as an advisor to presidents. That is that guy, this same guy. So I gave you our top guy. I gave you their top guy who's working in against us for the, you know, the other folks and against ADOS reparations. I give you our top guy who's having that conversation at the highest levels from the economic point. He's advocating for the investment into the Freedmen's Bank, which you know is a B1 Brother Moses talking point. I said that $2 trillion or $2.2 trillion in Harriet Tubman $20 bills capitalize the Freedmen's Bank based off of this legacy and watch it flourish. Allow that bank to reinvest and issue home loans. Allow them to purchase the home loans of African Americans who are currently underwater or facing that double foreclosure, and extend a lower reduced interest rate to them and watch that bank thrive. Give them the same opportunities to invest in Black businesses and entrepreneurship as white banks are giving white folks and other minorities, and watch that bank thrive and watch those businesses thrive. Give them the same ability to invest in venture capitalists and watch those like Ramil and his ventures in business start to thrive. Watch those businesses like the MOTs in the trucking and business, watch them thrive. But first, nigga, stop with the bitch ass talking points. We are fighting. We got work to do. I am a Morehouse alum and I have authorized this message for you. How the poor can save capitalism. Check out John Hope Bryant. But the links are in the description for everything that I said, every primary source, all the evidence, the primary cases, the cases themselves. How do you talk about lineage and who gets it? In this one case, when it came to banking and we talk redlining and we do all of that extra stuff, I've given you primary evidence, primary sources, a basic SWOT analysis, our strength. Let me see. Did I do that in my notes? Let me see if I did the SWOT. Oh, I even gave you a quick SWOT analysis just for this debate. I mean, this conversation, to make sure it's good. So the S is the strengths. What are you good at? What is working in your advantage? So right now, We have primary sources that establish lineage. So that helps debunk that argument. If you need it in the shortest amount of words right now, somebody says, well, who's going to receive it? How do you know who's ADOS and all of that? You say, well, we do have primary sources to help establish lineage. All right. And so the political arm, or what do you do as a political thing? That is HR 40, the study for the proposal and development of those proposals. We know that that's what we're looking at from a political standpoint. People like John Hope Bryant are pushing it from an economic standpoint to help establish civil rights. Funding mechanism goes through the Freedmen's Bank. So it's not United States Federal Reserve notes. They can be backed by the Federal Reserve. Yes, just like all other banks here in America. But the American banking system that I'm talking about for reparations, it would be none other than the Freedmen's Bank. And I don't care what else you say. And they already have an agenda, as I laid out with those 4 bullet notes, on how they can get that money to those other black banks and help them get capitalized. So don't talk to me about, oh, the logistics would be next to impossible. It's divisive. It's divisive. I don't want to hear that bullshit. They'll spend it all. They'll spend it all. The money is in the hands of the bank. You have access to it as a depositor and as somebody whose claims goes through them. And if you decide to withdraw all of your money on your spending, then so be it. But if you decide that you want to use banking services like everybody else and open up your your business, they have loans for that. If you needed venture capital or to establish a business account and equity for that, you have your own monies that you can do it. And that is reparations 101 in a business context, to keep it about the economic impact and how it is used to leverage and to go against any of that. Well, blacks are so worse off than whites right now, and there's a wealth inequality and all of that shit that they like to talk about. No, this is solution-based conversation to help address racial disparity in income and wealth inequality. Don't challenge me on reparations, MOT. Talk to me about who's the better black man. I actually received an invite to have a debate with someone in Black YouTube about something other than reparations. I said, man, that's just beneath me, man. I don't got time to keep educating these folks. We are already moving. Progress, yes, but we are already moving towards successful impact in our lifetime and in our legacy. You may not follow or hashtag, or you may not have your Google alerts set to people like John Hope Bryant. You may not be looking for the information actively, but the information is there if you wanted to know it. And I'm just giving you a business update on ADOS reparations, where we are. That was a couple of days ago. Many people didn't say anything about the Freedmen's Bank and the 155th anniversary of its charter. Many people let that day go right by. So I did want to bring that back out, that's what happened this week a long time ago. And it is still relevant today. What else do I got? Now, I can go into a heck of a lot more. Like I said, I got the primary sources. They're linked in the description. If you want the access to the microfilms, where do we find that lineage, that system, those archives? That link is in the description. If you wanted to just see if your family's names was on any of those rolls, and you already know that you can trace back your people, and that you know that there was even some soldiers in the Civil War in your DNA, your lineage, and that they may have been one of those people who either received the 69 cents on a dollar, and thus they would have the impact of that 31 cents and what that would mean here today, compound interest associated and all of that. Or you may have been a link to one of those families who were a depositor but didn't get anything back, and thus 100% of whatever claim it is. But the information is there. This is just one case for reparations in that reparations proposal. They said they wanted to study and develop cases and proposals. My name is Brother Moses, and I think I just gave you one hell of a one. And if you agree, be sure to like this and share this video. Did I give you opinions, or did I give you facts? Well, that'd be for you to decide. It has been good. Look at that. Look at that. Do you want to know about his business? You can even check him out. American Banker Magazine. If you don't think that this is a credible source, Innovator of the Year, this dude is actually phenomenal. Check him out. and see what he's doing in civil rights. You don't got to agree that civil rights. You might say that this still needs to be a militarized military science fight, that we need to stand up and fight for it. If that's what you believe, all right, that's on you. There are soldiers who are willing to get out there, the Xaviers out there, Xavier Johnson's out there ready to get out there and bang. You can go follow in their footsteps if you would like. Maybe your position is through media. You want to keep educating and keep the boot on their neck. And if that's you, then I'll rock with you. But it has been one good hour, 5 minutes over. That's about as much as I'm going to give you right there. B1, Brother Moses, that's all I got. Let me turn my music up on the outro because I'm out.